Malolei Soifua Chris Bishop.
Soiflava, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, this is a budget of a confident government in charge of a confident country. And in my 5 minutes, Mr Speaker, I want to talk about three things in the budget and talk about the Labour response. The first thing I want to mention is what the budget does for economic growth, because the budget, somewhat unusually in New Zealand, projects economic growth in the next 3 to 4 years of around 3%. And that's coupled with a low inflationary environment. And actually, in terms of New Zealand, that is highly unusual. And people say, well, that's pretty boring, you know, the budget doesn't do enough for growth. But actually, if we can continue to grow for 3 to 4 years at 3% or around 3% with low inflation, that will make a demonstrable difference to the incomes of New Zealand families and New Zealanders and to their jobs. And the budget projects increasing employment. The budget projects unemployment coming down. It projects increasing wages, and actually that's good for New Zealand and good for New Zealand families. The second thing I want to mention, sir, which is a feature of this budget, is the $790 million hardship package that my colleague Mr Foster Bell has talked about. And I know from my time on the election campaign and my work recently in my neck of the woods that there is hardship in our community and that there is concern in the community about that hardship, in particular where it affects children. And that's why it's extremely important that this government has acted upon that. And the member who spoke a few minutes ago, Louisa Wall, it's like the 2000s never happened for her, railing against the 1991 budget cuts of Ruth Richardson, the famous mother of all budgets. Well, Louisa Wall knows that the Labour government was in power from 1999 to 2008 and chose not to raise benefit levels. They had 9 budgets, they made the deliberate decision not to raise benefit levels, and during that time, the real value of wages increased and the real value of benefits in comparison to those wages declined because benefits are only inflation adjusted, whereas wages were rising faster than inflation, and because of that, the gap has, we believe on this side of the House, sir, blown out too far, and we now have the fiscal conditions to make a difference to hardship in this society. This is not a budget based on deception, as Louisa Wall would have you believe, sir. This is a budget that is going to make a demonstrable difference to the lives of many thousands of New Zealand families and many thousands of New Zealand children. This is not a budget based on platitudes, as she says. The only platitudinous speech that was given in this House in relation to the budget was that of her leader, Andrew Little, who mouthed platitudes and cliches and hackneyed phrases dreamt up from Phil Goff and David Shearer and leaders gone by, ran out of puff 15 minutes in and resorted to talking about former Kiss singers and roosters on heat. So the only platitudinous speech given in this House was by Andrew Little, the leader of the Labour Party. Mr Speaker, social justice is only possible with a growing economy, and that's why the hardship package is only possible under a national government. That's why it's national for the first time in 43 years is raising benefit levels, not a Labour government, because we are growing the economy and allowing the government to invest in people who need it most. The third thing I want to briefly mention, sir, is the innovation package in this budget as well. Another $80 million over 4 years for Callaghan Innovation grants. Some people criticise these grants and say, oh, it's just a bunch of bureaucrats handing out money. Not true. For starters, they are non-discretionary grants, right? So basically they go to people who are innovating in our community, our businesses involved in science and innovation. And I think, sir, there is a legitimate debate to be had about the difference between grants or the difference between them and tax credits. The problem with tax credits is that they tend to allow people to reclassify existing expenditure as research and development. And that's why Australia, which has a system of generous tax credits for research and development, apparently the most innovative part of the Australian economy is the financial services industry. And I think we can all agree that it is not particularly innovative, and actually what we want to do is grow the high-tech manufacturing sector, grow engineering and grow niche manufacturing, and that's what Callaghan Innovation is seeking to do. What was the response from Labour in response to this very good budget? Well, firstly, it was dumbstruck silence. And wasn't it telling that when John Key and Bill English, sorry sir, announced the first increase in benefit levels in 43 years, we heard not a word in response from the Labour Party. They just sat there in dumbstruck silence. And then the second thing was to complain about the surplus. We're not meeting the surplus target. From the guys who spent 9 years massively increasing spending, they spent the last 7 years opposing every piece of fiscal restraint, and they're still spending. $500 million committed by Grant Robertson in a stuffed chat just the day of the budget, Mr Speaker, promising to bring back the $1,000 KiwiSaver kickstart, a very ill-advised move. And then their third response was the diversionary tactic. I know, let's talk about means testing super. Well, that didn't work out very well for them. Mr Speaker, this is a good budget from a confident government.
Malolei Soifua Morris, the Honourable Morris Williamson.
Mr Speaker, can I first say a big thank you to the whips for